Hi from Big City Backwoods. I thought tonight I would show you guys how to paper piece. Some people call it foundation piecing, but that's one of my big hobbies, is to foundation piece or to paper piece and to create my own patterns. So I thought I'd show you guys the basics of how it's done. Your first step is going to be cutting out all of the pieces in your pattern. This pattern is for an electric guitar that I'm currently working on, but this is just one section of the guitar, so we'll call this big piece a section. Each individual part I'm going to call a piece. Each individual piece has a fabric. If you can take a look, the way that I design my patterns is I write the sections are lettered and the pieces are numbered, and then there's a box that indicates what color should be used. And this particular piece is I1, and the color that should be used is color number 4. Okay, I've gotten my kids back to bed again. So to review, I1 is the piece that we're going to sew. Well, we have to cut that piece out first, and that's supposed to be color 4. So for this particular project, I'm using this orange for color number 4. So I'm just going to cut a piece really quick. It doesn't have to be perfect. I'll show you. Okay. So we have I1, and I cut a piece of fabric. It's not the same shape, but it's big enough that it's going to definitely cover that section. And you can actually kind of see it on the camera even, but you can see that it shows through your paper. And you can see that it's going to work for this particular piece. For the first piece is different than the other pieces. The first piece, we're going to take the wrong side of the fabric, so this is the wrong side, this is the right side, but the wrong side of the fabric goes against the paper, so you can see the right side of the fabric. You can see that. Okay. So the next thing that we're going to look at, we don't sew anything at this point. The next thing that we're going to look at is the second piece. So we're looking for I2. And I2 is right here. And I2, if you look closely, is color 2. So I'm going to get my color 2, whatever I've decided is color number 2. And I'm going to cut out a little piece. Now if this is your first time paper piecing or foundation piecing, whatever you want to call it, I recommend that you cut your pieces a little bit big, because you're going to need to get used to how paper piecing works before you get good at it. So we're going to take, so if you can see, first let me show you, the I2 is really small, but I cut a piece of fabric that big. So what we do, let me see if I can show you this. It'd be easier with a cameraman. Okay, let me see here. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the fabric for section 1 and we're going to place it like so, right side up, on the back side where it will completely cover piece number 1. Then we're going to take fabric number 2, or fabric number 2 for section 2, and we're going to place it about a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch overlapping the line between section 1 and section 2. And we're going to sew that seam. I'm going to sew that seam and I'll come back and show you. Okay, I've sewed that seam, so if you can see the stitching, there we go, the stitching between I1 and I2. Let me show you what the back side looks like. Here's my stitching right here. And you can see that this is the wrong side of the fabric and this is the right side of the fabric. They're so right sides together, so that when it's ironed, it will be correct. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to trim about 1/4 inch away from that seam. Okay, there it is trimmed. Again, here's the seam. I've trimmed it. Now I'm going to iron it. Okay, so what I've done is I was working on piece number 3 right here, and it's color number 2. So I cut out a piece of fabric, color number 2, and I put it right sides together against the fabric to where it would be overlapping this line, and it's going to be the line between I1, I2, and I3. So you want to always do the line in between each block. You want to sew that. And I sewed that already. So at this point, what I need to do is I need to trim my seam to 1/4 inch. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for you. Okay, here's my seam after it's been trimmed. Now it's time to iron. Okay, here it is, all ironed. Now I'm ready to move on to section 4. So there's section I4, and it's color number 1, which is going to be white in my case. So I'm going to go ahead and go do that. I cut out a little scrap of fabric to do section 4. So I've got my piece here, and I'm going to do piece number 4. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the right sides of the fabric, which sometimes on white it's hard to tell, but I'm going to take the right sides of my fabric and put them together, and I'm going to overlap about 1/2 inch to 1/4 inch over where my line is. And I can use the light to see through my fabric if I need to, or to see through my paper if I need to see where that fabric exactly is going to land. And I want to make sure that my piece is big enough to cover section 4, which section 4 is pretty small, but sometimes the sections aren't that small. Okay, now I'm going to sew the seam between piece number 3, I3, and I4. So I'm going to sew this line right here. All right. Clip my threads, the ones that my machine doesn't automatically clip for me. And then I am going to grab my scissors. Alright, so I sewed the seam, hard to see probably, and I'm going to trim okay, so I trimmed the seam. Now I'm going to go iron. Okay, it's all ironed. It covers piece number 4 beautifully. Now I'm going to move on to piece number 5. As you can see, piece number 5 is also white. And that's it right there. The reason that it's the same color as piece number 4 is that they're at different angles, which is going to make our picture in the end. So let me go ahead and do that. So I'm going to cut a piece of my white fabric. It doesn't have to be perfect. Again, that's kind of the fun of paper piecing, is that you don't have to cut out your pieces perfectly. you can do what's called rough cutting, and it works out beautifully. Just make sure that your piece is big enough to fit, your piece of fabric's big enough to fit the piece of the paper. So then I'm going to put right sides together, and I'm going to overlap the line right here by at least 1/4 inch, if not a 1/2 inch. And I'm going to sew. Make sure that you backstitch at both ends. That's super important. Okay, I have sewn that seam, and I'm going to trim my fabric back here. Okay, so now I'm going to trim my seams to 1/4 inch approximately. It doesn't have to be perfect. And now I'm going to go iron again. Once you're done sewing your section, it will look something like this. This is a different section that I did earlier, so it won't have any areas that aren't covered by fabric. All of the seams on your section will be sewn. And once you sew all of the sections, once you complete your sewing on all the sections, you can start sewing your sections together. Your pattern should let you know what order to sew them in, and your picture will start to take shape. So something like this. I'm not done with all of my sections, but I pieced a little bit of it together so you could see. This is part of the electric guitar that I'm making. And that about sums up how to paper piece or foundation piece. So enjoy!